The sky turned black with drones on the third day. Mira Okonkwo stood on the ridge above New Mombasa colony and watched the swarm descend. Millions of them, each no bigger than her fist, moving together like a dark river flowing down from space. They made no sound. They carried no weapons. They simply landed on everything humans had built and began to take it apart. The Veth Collective had arrived at Kepler-442b. Myra had studied alien species for 20 years. She knew the Veth from reports and research papers. Insectoid beings, six-limbed, with shells the color of dried blood. They did not conquer worlds the way humans expected. They did not bomb cities or enslave populations. They were harvesters. They took resources, every resource, and they left nothing behind. She watched a drone land on a ground transport vehicle. Within seconds, the metal began to dissolve. The drone sprayed something onto the surface, and the steel turned to liquid, flowing into a collection pod beneath the machine. In less than a minute, the entire vehicle was gone. Not destroyed. Absorbed. This was happening everywhere. Down in the colony. People were screaming. Myra could hear them even from this distance. 8,000 colonists, the entire population of humanity's most remote outpost, running through streets that were disappearing beneath their feet. The drones took the buildings first, then the power generators, then the water purification systems. They took the hospital equipment while doctors tried to move patients. They took the communication arrays while people desperately called for help that would never come. The nearest human outpost was 47 light years away. Even if a message reached them, even if ships launched immediately, rescue was decades away at best. Mira walked down from the ridge. She moved slowly, carefully, stepping around drones that ignored her completely. The Veth did not care about biological matter. Humans were not resources to them. Humans were simply obstacles that would remove themselves once their support systems were gone. She found Colony Director Chun standing in what had been the main plaza. An hour ago, this space held the administrative center, the school, the community hall. Now it was bare earth. Chun stared at the empty ground with eyes that had stopped seeing. They took everything, he said. His voice was hollow. Every fabricator, every power cell, every medical scanner. They took the emergency shelters. They took the water recyclers. They even took the screws from the walls. Myra said nothing. There was nothing to say. The evacuation shuttle rose from the landing pad at the edge of town. 300 colonists had managed to board before the drones reached it. Myra watched the shuttle climb into the gray sky, carrying the lucky few toward the orbital station where they might find passage off-world. The shuttle reached 500 meters. Then the drones caught it. They did not shoot it down. They landed on it, thousands of them, and they began to take it apart in midair. Myra saw the hull plates peel away like skin from fruit. She saw the engine housing dissolve. She saw people falling from the disintegrating craft, their screams lost in the wind. The shuttle came down in pieces. Metal pieces flowed into drone collectors. Human pieces simply fell. Director Chun made a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. He fell to his knees in the dirt. By evening, it was over. The colonists gathered in the fields outside what had been their home. 8,000 people with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Some had managed to grab food before the storage facilities were taken. A few dozen ration bars, some dried fruit, a handful of water bottles. Enough for perhaps 2 days if carefully rationed. The Veth mothership hung in the sky like a second moon, vast and silent. Smaller vessels moved around it, processing the stolen materials, preparing them for transport to wherever the collective would use them next. A translation drone descended from the mothership. It hovered above the crowd of survivors, and a voice emerged from it. The voice was flat, mechanical, carrying no emotion that human ears could recognize. "You are soft creatures," the voice said. "You require your machines to survive. You require your structures and your systems. Without these things, you are nothing. In 14 rotations of this planet, our larvae ships will arrive. This world will become a nursery for our young. By then, you will be gone. The wilderness will consume you. The cold will take you. Your own bodies will fail you. There will be no trace that you ever existed." The drone rose back toward the mothership. It did not wait for a response. The Veth did not expect one. In their experience, species without technology simply died. It was not cruelty. It was mathematics. Night fell. The colonists huddled together for warmth. Some wept, some prayed. Some simply stared at nothing, their minds refusing to accept what had happened. A few talked about surrender, about finding a way to contact the Veth and beg for transport off-world. But everyone knew the Veth would not answer. Humans were not worth the effort of killing. They were certainly not worth saving. Myra sat apart from the others. She looked at the forest that bordered the fields, dark and dense and full of unknown dangers. She looked at the river that wound through the valley, its water cold and clean and filled with alien organisms. She looked at the mountains in the distance, their peaks sharp with volcanic rock. She thought about Earth. Not the Earth of starships and orbital stations, but the Earth of 100,000 years ago. The Earth where her ancestors had lived without metal, without power, without any of the things the Veth had taken. They had survived ice ages. They had crossed continents on foot. They had built civilizations with nothing but stone and wood and bone and the strength of their own hands. The Veth thought humans needed machines to survive. The Veth were wrong. Myra stood up. She walked to the edge of the forest and knelt beside an outcrop of dark stone. Volcanic glass, obsidian. She picked up a piece and tested its edge against her thumb. Blood welled from the cut. Sharp enough. She carried the stone back to the huddled colonists. She found a larger rock and began to strike one against the other, carefully, precisely, the way she had seen done in documentaries about ancient humans. Flakes of obsidian fell away. A shape began to emerge. A blade. People watched her. At first with confusion, then with something else. Something that might have been hope. Myra held up the finished tool. It was crude, ugly, nothing like the precision instruments the drones had taken. But it was sharp. It could cut. It could be used. "They took our machines," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying across the silent crowd. "They did not take our hands. They did not take our minds. They did not take 10,000 generations of knowledge about how to survive." She pointed at the forest, the river, the mountains. "Everything we need is right here. We just have to remember how to use it." She did not know if anyone would listen. She did not know if it would matter. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to die in 14 days. The first 3 days were chaos. People fought over the remaining ration bars. A man was stabbed with a broken piece of plastic, the only weapon anyone had. 2 groups nearly started a war over a single water bottle. Director Chun tried to maintain order, but his authority had dissolved along with the buildings he once commanded. Myra ignored the fighting. She had work to do. She walked into the forest at dawn on the second day. The trees here were not like earth trees. They had blue-gray bark and leaves that moved even without wind. But trees were trees. They had wood. They had fiber. They had uses. She found a species she called keth trees because she did not know their real name. Their bark peeled away in long strips, and beneath the bark were fibers as strong as rope. She spent hours pulling these fibers free, twisting them together, braiding them into cord. By evening, she had 20 meters of rope that could hold the weight of a grown man. On the third day, she made fire. She had no matches, no lighter, no power cell to create a spark. But she had wood and she had patience. She found a straight stick and a flat piece of dry bark. She placed the stick against the bark and spun it between her palms, pressing down hard, spinning fast. Her hands blistered. Her arms burned with exhaustion. But friction created heat, and heat created smoke, and smoke became ember, and ember became flame. When the fire caught, people gathered around it like it was a miracle. In a way, it was. Not because fire was special, but because someone had made it from nothing. Someone had remembered how Mira called a gathering that night. Not everyone came. Some were too weak from hunger. Some had given up completely and sat in the fields waiting for death. But enough came. Perhaps 300 people huddled around the fire, looking at this small woman who held a stone blade in one hand and a length of braided rope in the other. The Veth gave us 14 days, Mira said. They believe we will be dead by then. They believe this because they think we cannot survive without our machines. She paused, letting the words settle. They are wrong. She held up the obsidian blade. This is sharper than surgical steel. I made it this morning from volcanic rock. She held up the rope. This is stronger than synthetic cord. I made it yesterday from tree bark. She pointed at the fire. This came from 2 pieces of wood and the work of my hands. None of this required machines. None of this required anything the Veth could take from us. A man near the front spoke. He was thin and pale, an engineer named Vasquez who had designed half the colony's power grid. We cannot survive on rocks and rope. We need shelter. We need clean water. We need food. Yes, Myra said. We do. And we can have all of those things. She began to teach Dot. She taught them which plants were safe to eat. She had spent years studying the biology of Kepler-4 42b, and she knew which native species were toxic and which were nourishing. The blue bulbs that grew near the river were rich in protein. The yellow moss on the northern rocks could be boiled into a thick soup. The seeds of the tall grass could be ground into flour and baked into simple bread. Others began to remember their own knowledge. Kofi Mensah had been a structural engineer. He had designed buildings made of carbon fiber and smart glass. But his grandmother had grown up in a village in Ghana where houses were built from earth and stone. She had told him stories, shown him pictures, explained how mud bricks were made and how thatched roofs kept out the rain. Knowledge he had thought useless. Knowledge that now meant survival. Yuki Tanaka had been a chemist. She knew how to synthesize complex compounds in laboratory conditions. But chemistry was chemistry, and clay was just another material to be shaped. She found deposits of fine river clay and began experimenting. Within days, she had built a simple kiln from stacked stones. Within a week, she was producing ceramic pots, bowls, and containers that could hold water and store food. Former soldiers remembered how to hunt. The prey here was different from earth animals, but the principles were the same. They made adlabos, simple devices that extended the arm and let spears fly farther and faster. They made slings from leather and cord. They made traps from bent branches and woven fibers. The colony began to organize itself, not through orders from above, but through need from below. People who knew how to do things taught people who wanted to learn. Teachers became leaders, not because they held power, but because they held knowledge. Small groups formed around different skills. Hunters, gatherers, builders, crafters, healers. Myra taught everyone the most important lesson of all, how to teach others. Knowledge shared was knowledge multiplied. If only she knew how to make fire, then her death would mean the end of fire. But if she taught 10 people, and each of them taught 10 more, then fire would never be lost again. By the end of the first week, the first shelters rose from the ground. They were crude things. Walls of stacked stone held together with mud. Roofs of woven branches sealed with tree resin. Floors of packed earth. Nothing like the climate-controlled habitats the drones had taken. But they kept out the wind. They held in the warmth of small fires. They gave people a place to sleep that was not open ground beneath alien stars. By the end of the second week, they had clean water. Yuk. I designed a filtration system using layers of sand, charcoal, and ceramic. Water from the river passed through these layers and emerged clear and safe to drink. She built a dozen of these filters and placed them throughout the growing settlement. People no longer had to worry about parasites or contamination. By the end of the third week, they had enough food. The hunters brought in meat. The gatherers brought in plants. The farmers had begun to clear land and plant the seeds they had collected from edible species. It would be months before the first harvest, but the colony would survive long enough to see it. The Veth surveillance drones flew overhead every few days. They recorded everything. They transmitted their observations back to the mothership. But they did not interfere. The colonists were behaving exactly as the Veth expected primitive species to behave when stripped of technology. They were scrabbling in the dirt. They were playing with stones and sticks. It was irrelevant. It would change nothing. The 14-day deadline passed. Mira stood in the center of the settlement and looked around at what they had built. Stone houses lined a central path. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children played in the cleared spaces between buildings. Adults worked at tasks that would have been unimaginable a month ago. Making pottery, weaving cloth, sharpening tools. They were not just surviving. They were building a life. She thought about the Veth commander's words. You are soft creatures. You require your machines. She smiled. Humans had lived for 200,000 years before they invented the first machine. They had crossed every continent, survived every disaster, adapted to every environment. They had built the pyramids with copper tools and human muscle. They had sailed across oceans using stars for navigation and wind for power. They had created art and music and literature with nothing but their minds and their hands. The machines had come later. The machines were useful. But the machines were not what made humans human. Myra picked up a piece of obsidian and began to shape it into a new blade. Her hands moved with practiced skill now. The stone flaked away cleanly, revealing the sharp edge beneath. This was what made humans human. The ability to learn. The ability to adapt. The ability to take nothing and make something. The Veth had given them 14 days to die. It was day 23, and the colony was stronger than ever. 3 months had passed since the stripping. The village that rose from the ashes of New Mombasa had no official name. People simply called it home. It spread across the valley floor in a pattern that would have confused anyone expecting the grid layout of the old colony. Streets curved and wandered. Buildings clustered in groups based on function rather than planning. It looked chaotic from above. It looked alive. Myra walked through the morning market, something that had not existed 2 months ago. Hunters displayed their catches on stone slabs. Gatherers laid out bundles of edible plants, medicinal herbs, and useful fibers. Crafters showed pottery, tools, and woven baskets. There was no money. People traded what they had for what they needed. A ceramic pot might be worth a day's supply of meat. A well-made obsidian blade might buy a week's worth of bread. She stopped at Yuki's workshop. The chemist had come far from her first crude experiments with river clay. She now produced ceramics that were smooth, strong, and decorated with patterns pressed into the wet clay before firing. More importantly, she had discovered how to make pipes. Long, hollow tubes of hardened ceramic that could carry water from the river into the heart of the village. Running water. something they had taken for granted before the Veth came, something they had built again with nothing but earth and fire. "The new kiln is working well," Yuki said. She was covered in clay dust, her hair tied back with a strip of woven fiber. She looked happier than Myra had ever seen her in the old colony. "I can produce twice as many pieces now. We should have enough pipes to reach the eastern houses by next week." Myra nodded. "Good. The healers need reliable water access for their work." The healers were another miracle. Without medical scanners or synthetic drugs, they had turned to the knowledge of centuries past. They identified plants with medicinal properties. They learned to set bones and stitch wounds with needles made from fish bone and threads spun from plant fiber. They could not cure everything, but they could cure enough. The colony's survival rate was climbing every month. Population was climbing too. 3 children had been born since the stripping. 3 more were on the way. In the old colony, with its medical facilities and birth control options, children had been rare and planned. Now they were celebrated. Every new life was proof that the colony had a future. Myra found Kofi supervising the construction of a new community hall. The building was larger than anything they had attempted before. Stone walls rose 3 meters high, mortared with a paste he had developed from calcium-rich rocks crushed and mixed with water. The roof would be timber frames covered with layers of thatched grass sealed with tree resin. It would hold 200 people for meetings, celebrations, and shelter during storms. "We should be finished before the rainy season," Kofi said. He wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled. "My grandmother would be proud." His grandmother had died decades ago on Earth, but her knowledge lived on in every building he constructed. The past reaching forward to save the future. Myra climbed the ridge above the village as evening fell. She liked to come here, to look down at what they had built, to remind herself how far they had come. The valley glowed with the light of cooking fires. Smoke rose from kilns and forges. She could hear music drifting up from somewhere below, a song someone had composed using drums, made from hollowed logs and stretched animal hide. 8,000 people had been left here to die. 7,843 were still alive. The losses had been hard. Illness had taken some. Accidents had taken others. A few had simply given up and walked into the wilderness to die alone. But most had survived. Most had found something within themselves they never knew existed. She did not see the Veth ships until they were directly overhead. They came down fast. Without warning, 3 attack craft that screamed out of the clouds and opened fire before anyone could react. Plasma bolts struck the community hall, and Kofi's beautiful building exploded into fragments of burning stone. More bolts hit the water system, shattering the ceramic pipes Yuki had spent weeks creating. The market burned. The healer's hut burned. Houses that families had built with their own hands became craters in the earth. People ran. There was nowhere to run to. The Veth ground troops landed in the chaos. Not drones this time, but soldiers. Tall armored, their 6 limbs moving with mechanical precision. They did not shoot the fleeing colonists. They simply walked through the village and destroyed everything humans had built. They smashed pottery. They scattered stored food. They poisoned the wells with something that made the water turn black and thick. Mira grabbed a child who had frozen in terror and ran. She ran toward the forest, toward the hills, away from the death that walked through her home. Others ran with her. Hundreds of them, then thousands, streaming out of the burning village like blood from a wound. The attack lasted less than an hour. When it ended, the Veth soldiers returned to their ships and rose back into the sky. They left behind ruins. They left behind bodies. 17 people had died, crushed beneath falling buildings or caught in the plasma fire. The rest were scattered across the hillsides, hiding in forests and caves. Watching their world burn for the second time, Mira found shelter in a rocky overhang as night fell. 24 survivors huddled with her, including the child she had carried from the village. They had nothing. Again. The food they had stored was gone. The tools they had made were melted slag. The water they had purified was poison. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying. A man Myra did not know sat against the rock wall and stared at nothing, his mind broken by what he had seen. Why? The child asked. She was perhaps 6 years old, with dark hair and darker eyes. Why did they hurt us? Myra thought about the question. The Veth had not come back because the colonists were a threat. Stone tools and ceramic pots could not threaten a spacefaring civilization. They had come back because the colonists were not supposed to still be alive. They had come back because the math was wrong, and the Veth needed to correct it. Because we survived, Myra said. Because we were supposed to die, and we did not. The child considered this. Will they come back again? Yes, Myra said. She saw no point in lying. They will come back again and again until we are gone. Then what do we do? Myra looked out at the darkness beyond their shelter. Somewhere out there, thousands of survivors were hiding in small groups, scattered across miles of wilderness. They had nothing. They knew nothing about where the others were or whether they had survived. The colony was destroyed. The community was shattered. Everything they had built was gone, but they were still alive. We do what we did before, Myra said. We remember. We learn. We build. She paused, thinking about something that had been forming in her mind since the first plasma bolt fell. But this time, we do it differently. This time, we do not build one village for them to destroy. We build 20. We build 100. We spread out so far and hide so well that they can never find us all. The child nodded slowly. She did not fully understand, but she understood enough. Myra pulled the girl close and looked up at the stars. Somewhere among those distant lights, Veth larvae ships were approaching, ready to turn this world into a nursery for their young. Somewhere up there, the Veth commanders were certain that their problem had been solved. They were wrong. Humans did not break that easily. The Veth expected silence after the attack. They expected the scattered survivors to stumble through the wilderness alone until hunger and exposure finished them off. They expected the thermal signatures to fade one by one until Kepler 442b showed no trace of human life. Instead, the signatures multiplied. 6 months after the burning of home, Veth surveillance drones counted 23 separate human settlements across the continent. Small clusters of heat, hidden in forests and caves and valleys, spread across thousands of square kilometers. The drones destroyed the ones they could find. Within days, new settlements appeared elsewhere. Myra had learned from the first attack. She divided the survivors into groups of no more than 200 people each. Each group contained hunters, gatherers, builders, healers, and teachers. Each group carried the complete knowledge needed to survive independently. Each group was told to travel far, find good land, and build something small enough to hide but strong enough to last. They did not build villages anymore. They built camps, shelters that could be taken down in an hour and rebuilt somewhere else. Storage caches buried underground where drones could not see them. Lookout posts on high ground where watchers could spot approaching ships and sound warnings. The Veth found the camp in River Bend on a cold morning in the 7th month. 30 colonists lived there, farming a patch of land beside a fast-flowing stream. The attack came without warning, plasma fire raining down from a clear sky. But the people at River Bend had practiced for this moment. They grabbed emergency packs already prepared with tools, seeds, and dried food. They ran along escape routes already cleared through the forest. They scattered in 4 different directions, each group following a different path to a different predetermined meeting point. The Veth destroyed their shelters and their gardens. But they did not destroy a single human being. 3 days later, the survivors of River Bend had rebuilt their camp 12 kilometers away, hidden beneath the canopy of a dense forest where thermal imaging struggled to penetrate. This happened again and again. The Veth would find a settlement, destroy it, and declare victory. The humans would melt away into the wilderness and reappear somewhere else within a week. It was like trying to kill water by striking it with a sword. The blow landed, the water parted, and then the water flowed back together as if nothing had happened. The Veth commanders did not understand. Their species built hive structures, central complexes where all resources and population concentrated. Destroy the hive, destroy the colony. This was how war worked. This was how extinction worked. But humans refused to follow these rules. They had no center. They had no single point of failure. They were everywhere and nowhere at once. Myra traveled between settlements, teaching and coordinating. She had become something more than a leader now. She had become a symbol. The woman who had made the first blade. The woman who had taught them to remember. People called her Mother Stone, a name she found embarrassing but could not escape. She developed new systems of communication. Drum patterns that carried messages across valleys. Smoke signals visible from mountain to mountain. Runners who traveled between camps, carrying news and coordinating responses. The scattered settlements became a network, each part independent, but all parts connected. And she began to study the enemy. Veth patrols followed predictable patterns. Their drones swept the same areas at the same times. Their soldiers reacted to thermal signatures but ignored visual camouflage. They avoided certain regions entirely, places where volcanic activity had created mineral-rich soil that their equipment seemed to dislike. Myra investigated these avoided zones. She found deposits of a gray powder that stained her fingers and smelled faintly of metal. She collected samples and brought them to the camp where Yuki had established a new workshop. The chemist analyzed the powder using methods that would have made her university professors weep. Fire tests, water tests, acid tests using plant extracts. Primitive techniques that produce primitive results. But the results were clear. It is toxic to them, Yuki said. Not to us, but to them. Something in the chemical composition attacks their respiratory system. That is why their drones avoid these areas. Myra felt something shift inside her. For months, they had been prey. Running, hiding, rebuilding, running again. Always reacting. Never acting. But this powder changed everything. She ordered the northern settlements to relocate into the volcanic highlands. She had craftsmen mix the gray powder into clay and coat every surface of every shelter. She had farmers work the toxic soil into their fields, creating gardens that would kill any Veth, larvae that tried to hatch there. The Veth sent a ground team to investigate the new northern settlements. The soldiers walked into a valley where the soil was gray and the air carried a faint metallic taste. Within minutes, they were struggling to breathe. Two collapsed before the others could drag them back to their ship. The settlements in that valley were not attacked again. Word spread through the network. Other groups moved toward the highlands. They learned to identify the toxic deposits and process them into useful forms. Powder for coating shelters, clay for making bricks, paste for treating tools and weapons. The gray substance became their shield, a natural defense that required no technology to deploy. By the 9th month. More than half the surviving colonists lived in regions the Veth could not safely enter. The larvae ships arrived on schedule. Myra watched them descend from a ridge in the northern highlands. Massive vessels, each one carrying millions of eggs ready to hatch. The Veth plan was simple and had worked on 100 worlds before. The adult soldiers would clear out any remaining resistance while the larvae ships seeded the planet's most fertile regions. with the next generation of the collective. But the most fertile regions were exactly where the colonists had spread the toxic minerals. First larvae ships landed in the southern plains, where the old colony had stood. The eggs were deposited into the soil. The adults withdrew to let nature take its course. And nature took its course, but not the way the Veth expected. The eggs did not hatch. The soil had been contaminated. Not everywhere, but in enough places that the larvae survival rate dropped below sustainable levels. Millions of eggs, representing years of collective resources, died in the ground without ever seeing light. The Veth commanders realized they had a problem. They sent scouts to map the contamination. They found it everywhere, not just in the volcanic highlands, but spreading across the continent. Humans had been carrying the toxic minerals for months, working them into soil, dropping them into water supplies, coating rocks and trees along migration routes. The planet was becoming poisonous to Veth life. For the first time since their arrival, the Veth sent an envoy to negotiate. Myra met the envoy at the edge of the toxic zone. She was not alone. 200 colonists stood behind her, armed with obsidian spears and slings and bows. Primitive weapons that could not scratch a Veth warship, but could certainly kill a Veth diplomat. The envoy was a tall creature, its red shell marked with patterns that indicated high rank. It spoke through a translation device that made its words flat and emotionless. "You have contaminated this world," it said. "This is unacceptable." Mira did not respond immediately. She looked at the envoy, at the armed guards behind it, at the ships hovering in the distance. She thought about the 17 people who had died in the attack on home. She thought about the months of running and hiding and rebuilding. "You tried to exterminate us," she said finally. "That was also unacceptable." The envoy clicked its mandibles. "We offered you no violence. We simply removed the resources we required. Your deaths would have been natural. There is nothing natural about stripping people of everything they need to survive and leaving them to die." Myra's voice was calm, but her hands tightened on the spear she carried. "You did not kill us with weapons. You tried to kill us with absence. It is still killing. The collective requires this world for our larvae. Then the collective should have chosen a different world." The envoy was silent for a long moment. Around them, the wind carried the faint smell of the toxic minerals that saturated the soil. "We propose a compromise," the envoy said. "The northern highlands are unsuitable for our larvae. You may remain there. The southern regions will belong to the collective." Myra considered the offer. It was more than the Veth had ever given to any species before. A portion of a world, freely granted, in exchange for peace. Many would consider it a victory. She shook her head. "No." The envoy's mandibles clicked rapidly. "You refuse? You cannot win against us. You have no ships, no weapons, no technology. You have rocks and rope. Rocks and rope have kept us alive for almost a year now." Myra smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And we have learned patience. We have learned to spread. We have learned that you cannot destroy what you cannot find. Give us another year, and every hectare of this planet will be toxic to your larvae. Give us 5 years, and we will have forgotten that you ever existed." She stepped closer to the envoy, close enough to see her own reflection in its compound eyes. "Leave this world. Leave us in peace. Or stay and watch everything you planted here die in poisoned ground. Those are your options. There is no compromise." The envoy stared at her for a long moment. The Veth fleet withdrew on the 319th day. Mira stood on the ridge, where she had watched the drones descend almost a year ago. The sky was clear now, empty of alien ships for the first time since the nightmare began. The mothership that had hung like a second moon was gone. The larvae vessels that had carried the future of the collective were gone. The attack craft and surveillance drones and ground troops were all gone. They had simply left. The colonists did not celebrate immediately. They had learned caution. They watched the skies for days, waiting for the ships to return, waiting for some final attack. But the attack never came. The Veth had calculated the odds, measured the costs, and concluded that Kepler 442b was more trouble than it was worth. They would find another world for their larvae. There were billions of worlds in the galaxy. Surely some of them did not contain humans. When the celebrations finally began, they lasted for 3 days. Myra did not participate. She walked through the settlements that had spread across the continent, visiting each community, speaking with each group of survivors. She wanted to see what they had built. She wanted to remember. The camps had grown into villages again, but different villages than before. Smaller, more hidden, connected by trails through the forests and passes through the mountains. Each village was self-sufficient, capable of surviving alone if necessary. But they did not survive alone. They traded with each other. They sent teachers to each other. They married across communities and raised children who belonged to all of them. They had built something new. Not a colony, not a single settlement, but a civilization. A web of human life spread across an entire continent, rooted in stone and wood and earth and the knowledge of their ancestors. Population counts showed 7,621 survivors. More than 300 had died in the year since the stripping, lost to disease and accident and the occasional Veth attack. But more than 200 children had been born. The colony was growing again. Mira found Kofi building a new community hall in one of the larger villages. This one was bigger than the hall the Veth had destroyed, with stone walls thick enough to withstand almost any natural disaster and a roof that could be covered with camouflage. In minutes, if ships appeared in the sky. "We are calling it the Hall of Remembering," Kofi said. "A place to teach the old ways. A place to make sure we never forget." Myra nodded. The old ways. A year ago, that phrase would have meant something different. It would have meant the ways of the colony, the ways of technology and machines and digital networks. Now it meant something older. Fire made by hand. Tools shaped from stone. Shelters built with nothing but human strength and human knowledge. She found Yuki in her workshop, which had grown from a single kiln to a complex of buildings where dozens of craftsmen produced ceramics, glass, and simple metals. Yes, metals. Yuki had discovered how to smelt copper from ore deposits in the northern mountains. The first metal produced on Kepler 442b since the Veth took everything. It was not much. Enough for small tools, jewelry, decorative items. But it was a beginning. "We can have iron within a decade," Yuki said. "Steel within 20 years. If we wanted to? Do we want to?" Mira asked. "Why UK?" I considered the question. "I do not know. The old machines brought us here, but they also made us soft. Made us dependent. Maybe we are better off with stone and copper and our own hands." It was a question the whole colony would have to answer eventually. How much technology did they want? How much did they need? They had proven they could survive without any of it. But survival was not the same as thriving. There was a balance somewhere between the helplessness of the stripped colony and the dependence of the old one. Myra did not have the answer. She was not sure anyone did. But they had time now. Time to think. Time to choose. Time to build whatever future they wanted. Years passed. The rescue ships from Earth arrived on a morning 15 years after the stripping. They came out of the sky like the Veth had come, but slower, with human markings on their hulls and human voices on their communications channels. They had received the colony's distress signal decades ago and had launched a rescue mission that crawled across the light years at sublight speeds. The rescue commander was a woman named Chun. no relation to the colony's dead director. She landed her shuttle on a cleared field near the largest human settlement and stepped out expecting to find desperate survivors clinging to existence. Instead, she found a village of stone houses with glass windows and copper decorations. She found farms spreading across the valley floor, producing food for thousands. She found workshops where craftsmen made tools and weapons and art. She found children running through streets that were swept clean and lined with flowering plants. She found 15,000 people, twice the original colony population, most of them born on this world. Knowing no other home. Myra met her at the edge of the village. She was old now, her hair gray, her face lined with decades of sun and wind. But her eyes were the same eyes that had looked at volcanic rock and seen a blade. Her hands were the same hands that had made fire from nothing. Dr. Okonkwo? Commander Chun asked. We received your distress signal. We came as fast as we could. Myra laughed. It was not a mocking laugh, but a warm one, full of genuine amusement. We sent that signal 15 years ago. A lot has changed since then. Chun looked around at the thriving settlement. I can see that. What happened to the Veth? They left. Myra shrugged. They came to take our resources and leave us to die. We declined to die. Eventually, they decided we were not worth the trouble. How? Chen's voice was full of wonder. Our report said they stripped you of everything. Every piece of technology, every tool, every machine. How did you survive? Mira held up her hands. Scarred hands. Calloused hands. Hands that had shaped stone and braided rope and built a civilization from nothing. We used these, she said. We remembered what our ancestors knew. We learned what they had forgotten. We discovered that everything we truly needed had been inside us all along. Chun did not seem to understand. Myra did not expect her to. The rescue commander had come from a world where survival depended on machines, where humans were helpless without their technology. She had never been stripped down to the raw core of what humanity could be. We have transport, Chun said. We can evacuate your people to the nearest human outpost. You will have access to medical care, communication networks, all the comforts of civilization. Some of the younger villagers looked excited. The idea of starships and cities and all the wonders of the wider galaxy was appealing. But the elders exchanged glances. This was their home now. This world they had fought for, bled for, built with their own hands. Leaving it would mean leaving everything they had created. Myra looked at Commander Chun. She looked at the ships waiting in the sky. She looked at her people, the descendants of survivors, the inheritors of a new way of living. Some may choose to go with you, she said. We will not stop anyone who wants to leave. But many will stay. This is our world now. We earned it. Earned it? Chun frowned. The Veth just abandoned it. They could come back. They could. Myra smiled. But we will be here waiting. And we know something now that we did not know before. We know that we do not need ships or weapons or machines to survive. We know that as long as a single one of us draws breath, we will find a way. We will always find a way. She turned to look at the village behind her. Children playing in the square. Adults working at trades that would have been forgotten without the stripping. Smoke rising from forges and kilns. Music drifting from somewhere nearby. A song that had been composed here, on this world, by people who had never known Earth. Tell the galaxy what happened here, Myra said. Tell them that you can take everything from a human. Every tool, every machine, every comfort. You can strip us down to nothing but flesh and bone and will. And we will still survive. We will still build. We will still stand. Commander Chun looked at the old woman, at the village, at the world that humans had claimed with nothing but their hands and their minds. I will tell them, she said quietly. I will make sure everyone knows. Myra nodded. Then she turned and walked back toward the village, toward the life she had helped create, toward a future that no alien force could take away. Behind her, the rescue ships waited. Some colonists would board them, seeking the stars their parents had crossed to reach this world. But most would stay. Most would continue building, growing, thriving. The Veth had given them 14 days to die. 15 years later, humanity stood stronger than ever, and somewhere in the galaxy, in the cold calculations of the collective, a new entry was added to their records. A warning to all Veth commanders who might encounter humans in the future. Do not strip them. Do not leave them to die. Do not assume that taking their machines will take their strength, because humans do not need machines to survive. Humans only need to remember who they are.